problem is choice. That's what the architect told Neo in the Matrix movie. It is how he explained his constant failures to create the perfect simulation. At least that's what the author who wrote the script implied. And this choice, this problem, is a problem also for societies. The problem of choice. The problem, if you want to call it that at all, is that of free will. Because choice, after all, is the will being presented with options. The difference between willing and choosing, if there's a difference at all, is that the choice implies consciousness, whereas willing can happen on a subconscious level. The problem of free will, of choice, was also dealt with in the Bible with the Adam and Eve narrative. There it's presented as a cautionary tale. God supposedly gave Adam and Eve free will, but he didn't really allow them to exercise it. So it wasn't really free at all. It was free with restrictions. And of course, humans always will break the rules and they will go for the forbidden fruit. And the tale was really about trying to deal with a paradox created by Christianity. A paradox that's non-existent in Gnosticism and Judaism, because they believe in a God that is both good and evil, whereas in Christianity, God is presented as omnipotent, but also benevolent, absolutely good. And this is an issue because of the topic about the presence of evil in the world. So either God is not omnipotent, so he can't do anything about the evil, or God is not entirely good. Of course, Christianity dealt with this by outsourcing evil. They created Satan, which was really a Promethean caricature representing humanity. So, in effect, what humanity did is it created a God as he was defined in the Bible, in the Abrahamic traditions, is really a humanity scapegoat, presented as being the one using humanity as its scapegoat, so that God, this idea of God, could be absolved of of culpability concerning evil. So now mankind is the reason why paradise was lost and evil entered the world. And this is ironic because, in effect, it's the other way around. It's man using God as his justification for why he cannot abide by the ethics he presents as superior. The issue they're trying to confront here is how to discipline mankind to social norms and prevent him from from choosing things that are detrimental to the welfare of the whole in accordance with society's underlying ideals. This is the issue. The issue is, again, free will. In the biblical narrative, man is given free will just to unburden God from the implications, to purify God, to absolve God of evil. At the same time, God becomes an authoritarian, an all-seeing eye that disciplines men from, or when they exercise their free will in opposition to social ethics, social norms. That was the role of God as a carrot and stick. In effect, what the story says that man does have free will, but he just can't exercise it, because if he does, he'll be punished. Secular humanists went a step further, so that they didn't have to deal with shame and guilt. Shame and guilt was used in Abrahamism it was weaponized as a means of disciplining man. But with secular humanists, they don't need shame and guilt, because now God becomes further abstracted. We can see this in Schopenhauer when he positions his will outside space-time and makes it as groundless grounding. Essentially, what he does is he takes the concept of God, the biblical concept of God, and erases the God part, the motive, leaving only the will as an abstraction. Then he says that the will of man and of life is but a shadow of this metaphysical will. In effect, he gives it the Platonic treatment. He idealizes will out of existence, which was exactly what God was. It was a being that was defined out of existence as the ideal man. Now, individuals no longer have to feel shame or guilt, because nothing they choose is contrary to God's will. They cannot break the rules, because now they are abstract. They are nature's laws. So God is eliminated and becomes pure will, and God's commandments, God's rules, become nature's rules, which can never be broken. In effect, the salvation myth was ingrained into the secular ideology. It was no longer necessary for a savior to come and save man from himself, from his past, from his nature. Now man can do whatever he wants shamelessly, without guilt, without remorse, even without remorse, I guess, because he can no longer challenge God's will. He cannot challenge cosmic order. So God becomes the idea of the absolute cosmic order, which can never be challenged, requiring no savior. So what this implies is there's little room for human agency, for life, to have free will. Since everything is absolutely ordered, it's predictable, it's inevitable. Therefore, human agency, human choice must be an illusion. Just as in the Bible, the world, the experience world, is considered a fallen state, not really real, but a mediating stage before man dies and goes to the real reality, which is in this metaphysical realm. In the secular, this paradise lost is projected as a future that's imminent, but is never present, can never become present. It's infinitely imminent. This gives rise to the anarchist, who now could claim that without a God to impose rules upon man, man cannot impose rules upon man either. So now man is liberated, it's free, he's saved to do whatever he wants. But that's not the case, because morality does not require a God to come into existence. So it doesn't require a creator, it doesn't require man either. It comes into existence naturally through natural selection. What man does is he encodes moral behaviors and then makes amendments to it to facilitate the emergence of more complex social and economic systems. Ethics are amendments of moral behaviors that evolve naturally, and we can see them in many species. All social species exhibit moral behaviors which are intrinsic to their survival. Without them, cooperative survival and reproductive strategies could never have evolved. They are altruism, cooperation, tolerance, compassion, love. All these we can see in many species: canines, other primates, elephants, all social species. The difference with man is he encodes everything and then he intervenes and he changes it. That's the human factor. And this is what confuses many. These moral and ethical norms, rules, are imposed upon all individuals that participate within a group in order for them to benefit from the group. And we see this in all species where the dominant male imposes restrictions upon the other members of his pack or his group of the herd, not allowing them to do whatever they please, whenever they please. This is essential for society, for group dynamics to remain stable, because then, if not, they descend into chaos and there's no more any benefit to belonging to a group, to cooperating. And this sets up an interesting dilemma between the individual and his freedom and the welfare of the group, so that everybody can benefit. It's a dilemma tackled by Freud in his Society and Its Discontents, but also by Nietzsche, who of course championed individual rights. But I don't know what kind of society he envisioned where it was comprised of free spirits. Such a society could never be stable. Such a society would break apart and would succumb to another society which was more authoritarian. This is the problem with anarchy. It could never survive in the world because it could never compete with other groups which were more authoritarian, more stringent, more ordered. A loose cooperation of individuals that could opt out of cooperating is not a recipe for success. The irony being that Nietzsche, like his mentor Schopenhauer, didn't believe in free will. So I don't know what kind of individuality they imagined, or how this individuality would come about. I guess they believed that it was all inevitable. It was part of some cosmic plan, I guess. Because if you think about it, if there's no free will, there's no real need for big-brained species. The metabolically costly big brain would have no advantage if everything was determined and individuals and animals didn't have any agency at all. In the theory of natural selection, evolution, traits develop because they give an advantage. And by giving an advantage, they are propagated. But if everything is determined, there is no advantage to having a big brain. There is no difference, in fact, between the living and the non-living. And man is presented as being no different than a pebble. And this is an issue for hard determinists. How does life even evolve? Why does it evolve? And by what means does the multiplicity of life that we witness in nature evolve? And what advantage? How would an advantage benefit the individual if everything was determined? It wouldn't be natural selection. It would be natural determination. either completely or partially. How can they explain, for instance, like I said before, the evolution of big brains, the necessity of consciousness at all? What necessity does consciousness have if life has no agency? How does life differ from non-life? Why does life even emerge if it's all determined and life has no agency? Why is punishment even a thing? Why do we punish criminals if they have no choice in the matter? If it's all determined and they could not have chosen to do other than what they've done. So free will is not a problem for me because I don't believe in absolute free will, nor do I believe in absolute strength. When I say strong will, I don't mean this will is omnipotent. When I say this person is knowledgeable, I don't mean he's omniscient. When I say life, I don't mean it's internal, it's immortal. I don't Platonize concepts. For me, free will, freedom, is a matter of degree. And like all value judgment, it's a comparison. It's part of a triangulation, as I understand it. You have the subject, the conscious subject. You have its objective, and then you have its estimation of the effort, the work, the energy, the time it needs to attain its objective. This triad is what comprises a value judgment, all value judgments. So when I say free, I don't mean freedom as in metaphysical freedom, outside causality. In the same way, when I say strength or power, I don't mean omnipotence. That's absurd. But these people that believe that there is no free will, they actually selectively define freedom metaphysically. They don't do that with any other concept. Why don't they remain consistent and say the same thing about life? Why do they hold freedom in such a high standard and not life and not strength and not knowledge? What's their motive? Why are they so focused on making freedom metaphysical and absurd and unattainable? Why? For instance, when I define a concept, I begin with the experience, the observable, the testable act. I don't believe with an idea. I don't begin with an idea and then force reality into my beliefs. I begin with the act, even though I don't completely understand it. But that's what man has always done. Whenever they don't understand something, they position it in some metaphysical realm. Like when they first perceived the sun, they couldn't understand how it works, so they made it into a god. When they perceived fire, they didn't understand how fire works, what fire was. So they ascribed to its metaphysical traits. And now with life, it's the same thing. Because man cannot comprehend exactly how life emerges, we have to ascribe to it a metaphysical source. And the same thing with freedom, but only with freedom, the difference is they see the act, they experience it in themselves, the act of choosing. They know what it is, but they dismiss it because they have other objectives in mind. They want to dismiss free will for personal reasons. To understand the reasons why, we have to delve into the implications upon the human ego and what it likes to think of itself. The implications on identity and victim identity in particular. Because most people want to feel victimized by circumstances, by the world, by cosmic forces. They don't want to take responsibility for their own lives to any degree. They don't want to believe that it was their choices that led them down a particular path. This is one of the issues that arises from human intervention, from sheltering. In the wild, a bad choice usually leads to very severe consequences. But in human systems, even bad choices are forgiven, they are sheltered, they are protected. This affirms the idea that there are no such things as mistakes, because when an individual is protected from the consequences of his poor judgment, then he begins to believe that there is such thing as a mistake or as poor judgment. And of course, the idea of no free will also feeds into the modern ideal of parity, of equality. Because if there were severe consequences to bad choices, then it would be obvious that in nature there are no there is no equality. Actually, there is disparity. Disparity is the rule of natural selection. Without free will, parity is achieved, at least in theory. We are all equally enslaved, just as we are all equal in our sin beneath God's dominion. This is the motive. So the illusion is not that free will exists, but that free will does not exist. The problem is choice. What differentiates life from non-life? It is will. Will is what differentiates the living from the non-living. Choice. The living can make choices. The non-living cannot make choices. The non-living are governed by the rule of the flow towards the path of least resistance, whereas the living can choose a path that is more resistant. To emphasize, to explain this, let's use the metaphor of a river, just as Heraclitus did. A river flows down a mountainside, and its mass, its water mass, determines what in the geography is more resistant and what is less resistant, and it flows towards. It takes the route that is less resistant. Whereas if the river were given consciousness, were given a will, it could, in theory, flow towards the peak of the mountain. It would take the path of more resistance because maybe it wants to reach the peak and freeze itself and hope that it can last longer in a frozen state. Suffice to say that that's the difference between a life and a non-life. It is willfulness. Without willfulness, when determinists make willfulness an illusion, non-existent, what they're saying is that there is no difference between life and non-life. Equalizing a stone rolling down a mountain with a man or a goat climbing up the mountain. Essentially, they are making the advantage of being alive irrelevant. If we begin with a definition of the will, beginning with the observable, then we can say that will is just life, an organism, focusing its aggregate energies upon an objective. It's not a thing. Will is not a thing. It is a process. It is an act. The act focused upon an objective. That's why life always has objectives. So it must construct judgments, and based on those judgments, it must make choices in relation to its objectives. Just like the river in the allegory that I used. It is its objective, its willful objective, that forces it to take the path of more resistance. Because all life has an objective. The primary objective of life is its self-maintenance. So even primitive life, the objective is to replenish the energies it is losing due to attrition. Because like I said, everything is in flux, everything is interactive. Therefore, that's what we see in animals. They're obsessed with feeding with food, and man uses food to control and train animals. Only man, from what I know, can play something an objective above even his own survival. From what's already been stated, the determining factor of free will is the aggregate energies available to the organism. These determine how much resistance it can overcome, and consequently determines how many options it has. That's why a man who is wealthy is freer than a poor man, because a wealthy man has more options, and a strong man is more free than a weak man, again because he has more options. Available and accessible options can be used to measure the freedom of a will. So in order for a will to be absolutely free, it would have to be omnipotent, which is impossible. The problem is choice. So why is this debate raging online in certain philosophy forums? Not for the layman, because the layman just lives his life without concerning himself with such issues. But it is raging online between the compatibilists and determinists. I believe the reason is because of what's happening in the world today. We have an empire in decline, the United States, and it is an empire that has built its power on the idea of freedom, the land of the free, the home of the brave. Now all these individuals that were born and raised under its dominion are becoming disillusioned. So if they can't have absolute freedom, then they will have absolute unfreedom. The empire failed to deliver what it had promised. So now they will dismiss everything that hints at the ideals it had espoused and it used to seduce, manipulate, and exploit all the world's downtrodden, the desperate, the needy, those looking for hope, those looking for an identity, or those looking for hope or an escape from their past. Because if you really think about it, what did the empire, the American empire, the empire of lies, as Putin called it, what did it promise the world? It had promised an escape, liberty. Liberty from what? From the past, so that a man could reinvent himself as if from nowhere and nothing. That was the promise of the American dream. But it failed because you can't really escape the past. It was a pipe dream. It was a false dream. It was a lie. And now many are awakening to this, that you can't escape your past, because the past is always manifesting as presence and perceived experience as appearance. So this whole idea of America, where you escape the old world hierarchies and you can reinvent yourself and become a new man, and you can become anything you wish. You can be born a man and become a woman. You can be born a woman and become a man. You could be born poor and become rich. Whatever it is, that has proven to be a big lie. And all those that bought into the lie are now becoming the ones that deny the very idea of freedom. So now they subscribe to the idea that it's all determined, it's all a matter of fate. They go from one extreme to the other because their brains are governed by binaries that have been instilled there through the Abrahamic paradigm of good versus evil. If they cannot become absolutely free, godlike, then self-creating gods, then they must be slaves, impotent. If they can't be omnipotent, then they must be impotent. The problem is choice. And there's two approaches which determine if you're going to fall on the side of the ones that deny free will, or on the realistic side that believes in free will but in degrees, not in absolutes. And the approach is this: freedom from or freedom to. And this is the crucial point, the crucial factor. Because the determinists, they always think of freedom as freedom from causality, freedom from pain and suffering, freedom from mortality, freedom from whatever ails them. And of course, you can never become free of everything. The major freedom they seek is freedom from their past, which is their nature, their bodies, and its limitations. Because nature is just another way of saying the sum of all past nurturing, which is passed on genetically. And this, no man can escape. This determined past, no man can escape. But he could adapt to, he can modify with great effort. The other is proactive. It's freedom to. And ironically, it was expressed in Nietzsche's concept of will to power, will to. That's freedom to do something. And this is measured by one's options. Freedom to go this way or that way. Freedom to create this or to create that. Freedom towards one objective or another objective. And the amount of options you have will determine the degree of freedom you possess. And this is determined by your power. Not only your willpower, but the aggregate energies available to you. That's why cooperation is so crucial, because when an organism sacrifices a part of its will to participate in a group, what it's doing is it's sacrificing part of its freedom in order to multiply its freedom by investing its freedom within a group. The group acts as a multiplier. So in effect, the individual gains more options by participating in a group. And this is something I don't think Nietzsche understood, because he always championed the rights of an individual. He didn't fully explore how cooperation and participation in a group actually benefited the individual in the long term. Otherwise, why would nature evolve this sacrifice of individuality? The reason is because within a group, the individual gained a multiplier to its survivability and to its options. Of course, the size of the group and the underlying ideals that govern it will determine how much an individual and how an individual benefits. We're not talking here about sheep herds and wolf packs. We're talking about human cooperative unities, like tribes or societies. The problem is indeed free will. And what is decisive about the emergence of free will is that the existence cannot be absolutely ordered. Because if it is, then that's just another way of saying God, right? Absolute order is the totalitarianism of the biblical one God. In order for free will to be essential, to be necessary, then chaos has to be a factor, randomness, because then free will becomes an adaptive advantage to the emergence of unexpected circumstances. And here we must return to the wisdom of the Eastern peoples and their conception of yin and yang. In order, there's always a fragment of disorder, and in disorder, there's always a fragment of order. That means absolute states, like absolute order and absolute chaos, cannot be possible, because then existence would be non-existent. It is this imperfection in order which explains the Big Bang. Because if there was no imperfection, then the Big Bang would have completed itself, and it would have imploded into a singularity, and would not have exploded outward. So in my cosmogony, I think of the Big Bang as the other side of a black hole. I don't believe black holes are singularities, as they are called. They are approaches to a singularity that's not completed. It cannot be completed, because if it is completed, then existence would have ceased to exist. It would have imploded into a singularity, which is, if we think of space as an expanding field of possibilities, I think Heidegger described it this way. And if we think of matter as pockets of probability within this expanding field of possibility, because probability is a restriction of possibilities, right? So matter, that's what it is. That's what a pattern is. That's what order is. It's predictable and consistent. If a singularity was actually completed, then existence would cease. And on the other hand, if absolute chaos were to be completed, then everything would become uniform, and life would be impossible, because life is order, is a part of ordering within this expanding field of chaos. So what we call linear time is this increasing disorder. We're moving towards the absolute state of chaos, which will never be completed, because along the way, in my thinking, a near absolute state will emerge, something approaching the singularity, but not completing it. So another Big Bang. So I don't ascribe to Nietzsche's eternal return, because that's his way of rescuing immortality. Because not only did he need God as a scapegoat, I think he also needed immortality. He couldn't deal with the end of his existence. Perhaps the issue was all about his ego. And how could a genius like himself, and this also is true of Schopenhauer, how could a genius like them cease to exist forever and ever? So Nietzsche had to invent something to replace the biblical idea of immortality. So chaos is essential not only to explain the emergence of life out of non-life, but also the necessity, not the existence, the necessity of free will as an adaptation, as an adaptive factor, reacting to unforeseen circumstances. The organism has to make choices, has to make decisions. This cannot be determined by the past. All that the past can do is pass on to the future tried and tested methods. It cannot foresee what will come. Free will is essential to the advantages of adaptation. An organism must be able to adapt to unprecedented situations in order to increase its survivability. The past is transferred into the organism through DNA and is accumulated as memories, which inform its actions, its choices. This does not mean that the organism has no free will, only that its will, its judgment, its choices are guided by its past. That means the past sort of affects the probability that a certain choice will be made rather than another choice.